Persecution of Muslims in Myanmar history. Muslims have lived in Myanmar, also known as Burma, since the 11th century AD. The first Muslim documented in Burmese history, recorded in Mananyasawan or Glass Palace Chronicle, was Bayat Wai during the reign of Mon, a Thatan king, circa 1050 AD. The two sons of Bayat Wai's brother Bayat Ta, known as Shwabain brothers, were executed as children either because of their Islamic faith, or because they refused forced labor. It was recorded in the Glass Palace Chronicle of the Kings of Burma that they were no longer trusted. During a time of war, King Kyanzitha sent a hunter as a sniper to assassinate him. Pre-modern persecution. The Burmese king Bainong, 1550–1581 AD, imposed restrictions upon his Muslim subjects, but not actual persecution. In 1559 AD, after conquering Pegu, present-day Bago, Bainong banned Islamic ritual slaughter, thereby prohibiting Muslims from consuming halal meals of goats and chicken. He also banned Eid al-Adha and Qurbani, regarding killing animals in the name of religion as a cruel custom. In the 17th century, Indian Muslims residing in Arakan were massacred, providing harmful and actual persecution. These Muslims had settled with Shah Shuja, who had fled India after losing the Mughal War of Succession. Initially, the Arakan pirate Sandathu Dhamma, 1652–1687 AD, who was the local pirate of Chittagong in Arakan, allowed Shuja and his followers to settle there. But a dispute arose between Sandathu Dhamma and Shuja unsuccessfully attempted to rebel. Sandathu Dhamma killed most of Shuja's followers, though Shuja himself escaped the massacre. King Alampaya, 1752–1760, prohibited Muslims from practicing the Islamic method of slaughtering cattle. King Badapaya, 1782–1819, arrested 4 prominent Burmese Muslim imams from Mayadu and killed them in Ava, the capital, after they refused to eat pork. According to the Mayadu Muslim and Burma Muslim version, Badapaya later apologized for the killings and recognized the imams as saints. British rule. In 1921, the population of Muslims in Burma was around 500,000. During British rule, Burmese Muslims were seen as Indian, as the majority of Indians living in Burma were Muslims, even though the Burmese Muslims were different from Indian Muslims. Thus, Burmese Muslims, Indian Muslims and Indian Hindus were collectively known as Kala. After World War I, there was an upsurge in anti-Indian sentiments. There were several causes of anti-Indian and anti-Muslim sentiments in Burma. In India, many Buddhists had been persecuted by the Mughal Empire. There was significant job competition between Indian migrants, who were willing to do unpleasant jobs for low income, and the native Burmese. The Great Depression intensified this competition, aggravating anti-Indian sentiment. In 1930, anti-Indian riots were sparked by a labor issue at the Yangon port. After Indian workers at the port went on strike, the British firm stevedores tried to break the strike by hiring Burmese workers. Realizing they'd lose their jobs, the Indian workers returned to work, and stevedores then laid off the recently hired Burmese workers. The Burmese workers blamed Indian workers for their loss of jobs, and a riot broke out. At the port, at least 200 Indian workers were massacred and dumped into the river. Another 2,000 were injured. Authorities fired upon armed rioters who refused to lay down their weapons, under Section 144 of the Criminal Procedure Code. The riots rapidly spread throughout Burma, targeting Indians and Muslims. In 1938, anti-Muslim riots again broke out in Burma. Moshe Yagar writes that the riots were fanned by anti-British and nationalistic sentiments, but were disguised as anti-Muslim so as not to provoke a response by the British. Nevertheless, the British government responded to the riots and demonstrations. The agitation against Muslims and the British was led by Burmese newspapers. Another riot started after a marketplace scuffle between Indians and Burmese. During the Burma for Burmese campaign, a violent demonstration took place in Surti Bazaar, a Muslim area. When the police, who were ethnically Indian, tried to break up the demonstration, 3 monks were injured. Images of monks being injured by ethnically Indian policemen were circulated by Burmese newspapers, provoking riots. Muslim properties, including shops and houses, were looted. According to official sources, 204 Muslims were killed and over 1,000 were injured. 113 mosques were damaged. On September 22, 1938, the British governor set up the Inquiry Committee to investigate the riots. It was determined that the discontent was caused by the deterioration in socio-political and economic condition of Burmese. This report itself was used to incite sectarianism by Burmese newspapers. Japanese rule. Panglong, a Chinese Muslim town in British Burma, was entirely destroyed by the Japanese invaders in the Japanese invasion of Burma. The Hui Muslim Ma Guangyi became the leader of the Hui Panglong Self-Defense Guard created by Su, who was sent by the Kuomintang government of the Republic of China to fight against the Japanese invasion of Panglong in 1942. Panglong was razed by the Japanese, forcing out over 200 Hui households and causing an influx of Hui refugees into Yunnan and Kokang. One of Ma Guangyi's nephews was Ma Yeyi, a son of Ma Guanghua, and he narrated the history of Panglong, which included the Japanese attack. An account of the Japanese attack on the Hui in Panglong was written and published in 1998 by a Hui from Panglong called Panglong Booklet. The Japanese attack in Burma caused the Hui Mu family to seek refuge in Panglong, but they were driven out again to Yunnan from Panglong when the Japanese attacked Panglong. During World War II, the Japanese passed easily through the areas under Rohingyas. The Japanese defeated the Rohingyas, and 40,000 Rohingyas eventually fled to Chittagong after repeated massacres by the Burmese and Japanese forces. Muslims under General Ne Win. When General Ne Win came to power in 1962, the status of Muslims changed. For example, Muslims were expelled from the army. Muslim communities that segregated themselves from the Buddhist majority faced greater difficulties than those who integrated, potentially forfeiting observance of Islamic laws. The anti-Buddhist actions of the Taliban in Afghanistan, the destruction of the Buddhas of Bamyan, was also used as a pretext to commit violence against Muslims in Burma by Buddhist mobs. Human Rights Watch reports that there was mounting tension between the Buddhist and Muslim communities in Taungoo for weeks before it erupted into violence in the middle of May 2001. Buddhist monks demanded that the Hantha Mosque in Taungoo be destroyed in retaliation for the destruction of the Buddhas of Bamyan. Religious freedom for Muslims is reduced. Monitoring and control of Islam undermines the free exchange of thoughts and ideas associated with religious activities. Accusations of terrorism are made against Muslim organizations such as the All-Burma Muslim Union. It is widely feared that persecution of Muslims in Burma could foment Islamic extremism in the country. Many Muslims have joined armed resistance groups who are fighting for greater freedoms in Burma. 1997 Mandalay riots. Tension grew between Buddhists and Muslims during the renovation of a Buddha statue. The bronze Buddha statue in the Mahamayatmuni Pagoda, originally from the Arakan, brought to Mandalay by King Bhattacharya in 1784, was renovated by the authorities. The Mahamayatmuni statue was broken open, leaving a gaping hole in the statue, and it was generally presumed that the regime was searching for the Padamiya Maidchen, a legendary ruby that ensures victory in war to those who possess it. On March 16, 1997, in Mandalay, a mob of 1,000 to 1,500 Buddhist monks and others shouted anti-Muslim slogans as they targeted mosques, shophouses, and vehicles that were in the vicinity of mosques for destruction. Looting, the burning religious books, acts of sacrilege, and vandalizing Muslim-owned establishments were also common. At least 3 people were killed and around 100 monks arrested. The unrest in Mandalay allegedly began after reports of an attempted rape of a girl by Muslim men. Myanmar's Buddhist youth wing asserts that officials made up the rape story to cover up protests over the custodial deaths of 16 monks. The military has denied the youth's claim, stating that the unrest was a politically motivated attempt to stall Myanmar's entry in ASEAN. Attacks by Buddhist monks spread to the then capital of Myanmar, Rangoon, as well as to the central towns of Pegu, Prom, and Taungoo. A curfew remains in force in Mandalay until today, and the army patrols the streets in many cities. In Mandalay alone, 18 mosques were destroyed and Muslim-owned businesses and property vandalized. Copies of the Quran were burned. The military junta that ruled Myanmar turned a blind eye to the disturbances as hundreds of monks were not stopped from ransacking mosques. 2001 anti-Muslim riots in Taungoo. In 2001, anti-Muslim pamphlets, most notably The Fear of Losing One's Race, were widely distributed by monks. Many Muslims feel that this exacerbated the anti-Muslim feelings that had been provoked by the destruction of the Buddhas of Bamyan in Afghanistan. On May 15, 2001, anti-Muslim riots broke out in Taungoo, Pegu Division, resulting in the deaths of about 200 Muslims, in the destruction of 11 mosques and the setting ablaze of over 400 houses. On 15th May, the first day of the anti-Muslim uprisings, about 20 Muslims who were praying in the Hanna Mosque were killed and some were beaten to death by the pro-junta forces. On 17th May, Lieutenant General Win Mint, Secretary No. 3 of the SPDC and Deputy Home and Religious Minister, arrived in Taungoo and curfew was imposed there until July 12, 2001. Buddhist monks demanded that the ancient Hanna Mosque in Taungoo be destroyed in retaliation for the destruction in Bamiyan. On 18th May, the Hanna Mosque and Taungoo Railway Station Mosque were razed to the ground by bulldozers owned by the SPDC junta. The mosques in Taungoo remained closed as of May 2002. Muslims have been forced to worship in their homes. Local Muslim leaders complain that they are still harassed. After the violence, many local Muslims moved away from Taungoo to nearby towns and to as far away as Yangon. After 2 days of violence, the military stepped in and the violence immediately ended. 2012 Rakhine State riots. Since June 2012, at least 166 Muslims in Rakhine have been killed in sectarian violence in the state. 2013 anti-Muslim riots in Myanmar. Since March 2013, riots have flared up in various cities in central and eastern Myanmar. The violence has coincided with the rise of the 969 movement, which is a Buddhist nationalist movement against the influx of Islam in traditionally Buddhist Myanmar. Led by Sayadaw Wairatu, 969 has claimed that he/they do not provoke attacks against Muslim communities, although some people have called him the Buddhist bin Laden. In an open letter, Wairatu claims he treated both journalist, Hannah Beach, and photographer with hospitality during the interview for Time magazine, and that he could see deceit and recognize his sweet words for all people's sake. In the letter, he claims he has respect for the Western media, but that the Time reporter misinterpreted his peaceful intentions. "My preaching is not burning with hatred as you say," Wairatu says to Beach in his open letter. He goes on to say that he will forgive the misunderstanding if she is willing to do an about-face on the article. However, much of his public speeches focus on retaliation against Muslims for invading the country. Michael Jerryson, author of several books heavily critical of Buddhism's traditional peaceful perceptions, stated that, "The Burmese Buddhist monks may not have initiated the violence, but they rode the wave and began to incite more." While the ideals of Buddhist canonical texts promote peace and pacifism, discrepancies between reality and precepts easily flourish in times of social, political and economic insecurity, such as Myanmar's current transition to democracy. 2014 Mandalay riots. In July, a Facebook post emerged of a Buddhist woman being raped, supposedly by a Muslim man. In retaliation, an angry, vengeful mob of 300 people started throwing stones and bricks at a tea stall. The mob went on to attack Muslim shops and vehicles and shouted slogans in Muslim residential areas. 2 men, 1 Buddhist and 1 Muslim, were killed. Roughly a dozen people were injured. A curfew was imposed on 3rd July. 2016 mosque burnings. In June, a mob demolished a mosque in Bago region, about 60 kilometers northeast of the capital Yangon. In July, police were reported to be guarding the village of Rakhine in Rakhine State, after failing to stop Buddhist villagers setting the mosque ablaze. Shortly after, a group of men destroyed a mosque in central Myanmar in a dispute over its construction. 2016 Rohingya persecution. In late 2016, the Myanmar military forces and extremist Buddhists started a major crackdown on the Rohingya Muslims in the country's western region of Rakhine State. The crackdown was in response to attacks on border police camps by unidentified insurgents, and has resulted in wide-scale human rights violations at the hands of security forces, including extrajudicial killings, gang rapes, arsons, and other brutalities. The military crackdown on Rohingya people drew criticism from various quarters, including the United Nations, human rights group Amnesty International, the U.S. Department of State, and the government of Malaysia. The de facto head of government Aung San Suu Kyi has particularly been criticized for her inaction and silence over the issue and for not doing much to prevent military abuses. 2017 Rohingya persecution. In late 2017, The Myanmar military forces and local Buddhist extremists attacked the Rohingya people and committed atrocities against them in the country's northwest Rakhine State. The atrocities included attack on Rohingya people and locations, looting and burning down Rohingya villages, mass killing of Rohingya civilians, gang rapes, and other sexual violence. During the persecution, the military and the local Buddhists killed at least 10,000 Rohingya people, burnt down and destroyed 354 Rohingya villages in Rakhine State, looted many Rohingya houses, committed widespread gang rapes and other forms of sexual violence against the Rohingya Muslim women and girls. The military drive also displaced a large number of Rohingya people and made them refugees. According to the United Nations reports, as of January 2018, nearly 690,000 Rohingya people had fled or had been driven out of Rakhine State, who then took shelter in the neighboring Bangladesh as refugees. In December, 2 Reuters journalists who had been covering the Indian massacre event were arrested and imprisoned. The 2017 persecution against the Rohingya Muslims has been termed as ethnic cleansing and genocide. British Prime Minister Theresa May and United States Secretary of State Rex Tillerson called it ethnic cleansing, while the French President Emmanuel Macron described the situation as genocide. The United Nations described the persecution as a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. In late September that year, a 7-member panel of the Permanent People's Tribunal found the Myanmar military and the Myanmar Authority guilty of the crime of genocide against the Rohingya and the Kachin minority groups. The Myanmar leader and state councillor Aung San Suu Kyi was again criticized her silence over the issue and for supporting the military actions. Subsequently, in November 2017, the governments of Bangladesh and Myanmar signed a deal to facilitate the return of Rohingya refugees to their native Rakhine State within 2 months, drawing a mixed response from international onlookers. A Muslim butcher's home was attacked in Taungoo of Mekwe region on September 10, 2017 by a Buddhist mob amidst ethnic tensions. The mob also marched upon a mosque before being dispersed by the police.